Don's up. Don Johnson. That's awesome. He says, I understand the concept of using city subdomains for local businesses, but then for the root domain, do you focus on the main city or do you just focus it on anything at all? Maybe state. Don, I always just use that as like the brand site. Like if there's a corporate headquarters, then that's what I will target this site. The root domain for will be like the corporate site. So it will, if there's a corporate headquarters, like a physical location, then I will reserve the root domain for that. So like if you're using, again, we can talk about structured data again, but if you're using like organizational markup and then you have separate locations, right, then you would use the root domain for that. And then all your separate locations would be listed on subdomains, if that makes sense. So that's typically how I do it. So if you don't have a corporate headquarters, but you have like, then you can use, in other words, if you've got like all of your locations already built out on subdomains, then just use the root domain. At least this is the way I do it. I just use the root domain as like literally like a brand website. And it's more or less just a billboard, like an online flyer that says, this is who we are, this is what we do. And the pages on the site are like the locations page, the about us page, and the contact us page. That's it. That's all that's necessary. Unless you're going to be blogging from the root domain to the tier 1 branded network for all of the subdomain locations, in which case you want to have a blog and you want to have categories to match each one of the locations. So that whenever you create a post, if you're blogging from the root domain, to do all your link building and content syndication from one website and from one WordPress site as opposed to multiple subdomains. That's how I do it for the most part, guys. We talk about this all the time. But when you have multiple locations, I always try to just build the single tier branded syndication network and then do all of my blogging from the root domain to cover all the subdomain locations. And then after a period of time and syndicating multiple posts and checking rankings and that kind of stuff, you'll notice that some of the locations will respond well to that. But then some of the subdomain locations won't. And the ones that need the additional push, you can always go out and create location-specific syndication networks for those subdomains that need the extra push, and then blog directly from those subdomains. But remember, try to get the best results with the minimum amount of work. So one branded network is all that's needed for multi-location. You blog from the root domain, cover all of your subdomains from that same blog. Just make sure you match categories with locations. If that makes sense.
Well, if I can just add something, one of the basic principles of our Syndication Academy and RYS Academy is to brand. We create a brand and we associate the brand, the keywords to the brand. We don't just chase keywords. We don't just chase location plus keywords. We actually teach you or tell you, build your brand and then associate the keywords to the. That's why what we do works so well. That's what sets us apart from everybody else, because there's hardly anyone online right now teaching you to do it like the big boys do it. Create your brand, associate the keywords to the brand, and then everything else just flows in. Whatever you do after that, whether you're blogging or doing a podcast, where you're doing whatever it is that you're doing in your social media or whatever, it's always pushing the brand and the keywords. The brand and the services, the brand and your product, but it is brand. So, and then the bot, once you hit it over the head enough, is smart enough. Oh, okay. So I need to associate this brand with this set of keywords, and that's when the magic starts happening. When the bot, I call it training the bot, but when the bot's been trained that way, then all sorts of good stuff starts. It just starts to happen.
Yep, totally agree, and that's. That's part of like what we talked about with the crowd search webinar is that association that is made by the algorithm. RankBrain, guys, it learns, right? It's machine learning, but it's learning nonetheless. And so over time, with those associations are made and stored, and so it ends up adding weight to the site. How I was introduced into the concept was called site weight. And so all things being equal, if you had two, like let's just say plumbing sites that had the same, virtually or comparably the same on-page SEO and the same off-page SEO, and I know this is obviously hypothetical because it's damn near impossible for that to be the case, but if those two were the same, everything else was virtually the same, then the site that had more brand mentions and more more brand mentions, more navigational searches, which is people like searching for the company name contact information, company name location, that kind of stuff. That site will outrank the other one every time because it's given more weight by Google. In other words, it's a more authoritative brand. And that's what the algorithm determines that through search history and a lot of the other things, the semantic relationships and all that stuff. And that's in part why it works so well. So thank you, Mark, for bringing that up. So Don, yeah, just last thing is on the main domain. That's what I'm talking about. Just anything that's like you're talking about smaller city pages that aren't worth an entire subdomain. I get that. That's fine. That's absolutely fine to do that on the root domain. I would just, have a locations page that also links out and use the organizational structure, structured data markup, because then you can, I can't show you an example. I wish I could, but I've got, like I do that for some of my sites that have multiple locations. You set a locations page, you mark everything up, you list all of your locations, everything's marked up correctly. It's very, very powerful. And then from the root, like I said, the root domain, you just focus on, if you have a physical location for like a corporate headquarters, you make the root specifically about that, but you can have all the other locations listed, like I said, and then, if you have like smaller city pages and stuff that aren't worthy of a subdomain, like you mentioned, that's fine. You can put all those on the root domain as well. What I would recommend with that though is, and that's why I said you don't for a lot of times, and I don't want to overcomplicate this because I don't know how experienced you are, Don, but a lot of times people will put local business structured data and with JSON LD markup in the site header, which is fine. But in a case like this, where you're going to have a locations page and potentially smaller city pages hosted on the root domain, you don't want to do that. What you want to do is on the locations page, use the structured data markup and put your work, because that's fine, guys. As per Google's best practices when it comes to structured data, they say it doesn't have to be on every page of the site. It only needs to be on a locations, about, or contact page. That's it. Google will read, as long as it's you don't have bot blockers on there. Google will read it and will recognize and associate that business with that markup, if that makes sense. So for something like that, if you've got, you don't want to put it in site-wide is what I'm saying. You want to add that code specifically to the locations page. And then for each one of your smaller city pages, I would inject structured data into each one of those individual pages for that specific location. But if you don't have, you say smaller city pages, they might not have physical locations anyways. That makes sense.